Eleanor's hands were steady on the sprayer nozzle, rinsing 3 dinner plates in the time it took the line to fire 2. An unforgivable pace on the busiest Friday table. 11 had seen in months. Adrian stood over her at the dish pit, his white chef's coat unbuttoned at the collar, sweat darkening his hairline. "Faster, Eleanor. I need those ramekins now." Eleanor didn't answer. She never did. Around her the kitchen roared, tickets spitting from the printer, pans hissing on the flat top, a cook shouting, "Behind!" as he cut past with a tray. And in the middle of all of it, 63 years old, silver hair escaping its low bun, Eleanor moved with a precision no one in that kitchen had bothered to notice in 8 months of employment. Her forearm caught the light for half a second, a thin white scar running from wrist to elbow, the kind that comes from decades of working near open flame, not from washing dishes. 3 tables were still waiting on their entrees. Adrian's investors from Meridian Hospitality Group sat at table 6, watching the second course arrive 12 minutes late. A restaurant critic from the bellwether table, a man named Richard, had a reservation for 8:15 under a name that wasn't his own. Adrian didn't know that yet. What he knew was that everything he had built over the last 14 months, the restaurant, the 4-star write-up in his first 3 months, the investors who believed a 29-year-old could carry a fine dining kitchen, was one bad Friday away from unraveling, and the old woman at the dish pit was, in his mind, the weak link threatening to snap it. 14 months earlier, Adrian had opened Table 11 with $40,000 of his own savings, and a cookbook he'd read so many times its spine had cracked in 3 places. The Quiet Kitchen, written by a chef known only as E. Hale, out of print for a decade, found for $11 in a used bookstore on a slow Tuesday in Portland. Adrian had built his entire menu around techniques from that book, the way he balanced acid against fat, the exact 2 centimeters he plated a garnish off-center, the trick of finishing a pan sauce with cold butter instead of cream. In interviews, he called it instinct. He had never once wondered who E. Hale actually was, or whether she was still alive. Eleanor had been hired in April, answering an ad for a dish station position, $17.25 an hour, 6 shifts a week, taped to the window of a laundromat 2 blocks from her studio apartment at Cedarwood, the kind of building where the elevator worked maybe half the time. She told the hiring manager her name was Eleanor Hale and nothing else, and nobody had asked for more. In the 8 years since Ellery's, her restaurant in Seattle, the one with the wait list and the write-ups and the James Beard nomination she never collected, because by then her son Tommy was already gone. 17 years old, a car accident on a wet road in November. Eleanor had learned that the less people knew about her, the less there was left to lose a second time. She drank for 3 of those years. Her husband left during the second one. She had been sober for 5, and she had not picked up a chef's knife with intention, not once, since the funeral. Before we continue, if you believe that talent doesn't retire and dignity doesn't punch out at the end of a shift, please like this video, subscribe to Kalaxor, and share this with someone who needs to believe in people again today. By 8 o'clock, the kitchen was drowning. The walk-in cooler's compressor had failed that afternoon. Half the mise en place had to be remade from scratch, and Adrian's sous chef had walked out mid-shift after a screaming match nobody wanted to repeat. Eleanor, technically confined to the dish pit, had quietly started fixing what she could between racks of dirty pans. A knob of cold butter dropped into a broken sauce no one had asked her to touch. A garnish nudged 2 centimeters to the left before a plate went out. The same small corrections she used to teach her own line cooks without thinking. Sophia, 26, working the sauté station, noticed. She always noticed. She just hadn't said anything, because months ago Eleanor had asked her not to, in a tone that ended the conversation before it started. At 8:40, a ticket came back, a rack of lamb marked too salty, and something in Adrian snapped. He crossed the kitchen to the dish pit where Eleanor stood over a mountain of pans and called her name loud enough that the pass went quiet. "You're done," he said. "I've been carrying you for months. You're too slow, you don't listen, and now customers are sending food back on the biggest night of my career. Punch out." Eleanor set down the rack she was holding. She didn't argue. She untied her apron with hands that didn't shake, folded it once, and set it on the steel counter. "It wasn't too salty," she said quietly. "It needed acid, not salt. You added lemon to compensate, and it made it worse." Adrian stared at her. "Get out of my kitchen," he said. Eleanor lifted her coat from the hook by the door and walked out into the rain without another word. The next 40 minutes were the worst of Adrian's professional life. Without Eleanor quietly catching what no one else caught, the kitchen collapsed in full view of the dining room. 2 more plates came back. Table 6 sat over cold appetizers for 11 minutes, while the pass backed up behind them. At 8:15, seated alone at a 2-top near the window, with a black leather notebook open beside his water glass, Richard had already written the first line of a review Adrian would not want printed. 3 blocks away, Eleanor stood soaked at a covered bus stop on Route 17, a canvas bag with nothing but a folded apron sitting at her feet, thinking, as she often did on nights like this, of a boy who used to wait for her outside Ellery's back door until closing, doing his homework on an overturned milk crate. It was Sophia, who finally said something, pulling Adrian aside during the only 60 seconds of quiet the kitchen had all night. "You have no idea who you just fired," she said. "She's been fixing your food for months. Every night after service, she checks the walk-in labels. Her handwriting's on half your prep containers, Adrian. Go look." He did. In the walk-in, in neat, practiced cursive on strips of masking tape, was Eleanor's handwriting on a dozen containers. The same looping E, the same slanted H that Adrian had stared at for 14 months on the title page of The Quiet Kitchen, a signature he'd traced with his own finger more times than he could count. E. Hale. Eleanor Hale. The woman he had just fired for being too slow had written the book that built his entire career, and he had let her scrub his pots for 8 months without once asking whether her name meant anything at all. Richard found him first. He'd come back toward the kitchen, notebook still in hand, to ask about a dish he'd tasted 20 minutes earlier. The lamb Eleanor had corrected before it left the pass. "Whoever balanced that sauce," Richard said, "I haven't tasted hands like that since Ellery's closed. Where's your chef?" Adrian didn't answer. He was already pulling off his own apron. He found Eleanor still waiting at the bus stop, her coat soaked through at the shoulders, rain running off the plastic shelter above her. He stood in front of her, breathing hard, and for the first time in 14 months, Adrian didn't know what to say. "I read your book 200 times, he finally managed. "I built this whole place out of your book, and I fired you for washing dishes wrong." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. "I stopped cooking after my son died," she said. Washing dishes was the only kitchen job that didn't ask anything of me. I liked that. I didn't want anyone to need me again. Her voice didn't break, but her hands, wrapped around the strap of her bag, tightened until the knuckles went pale. Adrian sat down on the bench beside her, in the rain, and said nothing else for a while. Then, "I need someone in that kitchen, not at the dish pit, at the pass. Your name on the menu, if you'll let me put it there." Eleanor didn't answer right away. The first bus came and went without her. 3 weeks later, Table 11 added a single new item to the menu. A rack of lamb with a citrus reduction, named simply Tommy's Plate, with a short line underneath, developed by executive chef Eleanor Hale. Eleanor came in 6 days a week, same as before, except now she stood at the pass in a white coat of her own, correcting seasoning with a spoon instead of a sprayer nozzle, teaching Sophia the trick with the cold butter that Adrian had never quite gotten right. She still rode Route 17 home most nights. She still didn't talk about Tommy unless someone asked gently, and Sophia had learned exactly how gently that needed to be. On a quiet Tuesday months later, Adrian watched from the pass as Eleanor picked up a chef's knife, her own, a Wüsthof she'd kept wrapped in a drawer since the funeral, its handle worn smooth by a hand that had once known exactly what to do with it, and broke down a rack of lamb in 4 clean, unhurried motions. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. The kitchen, for the first time in 14 months, was exactly as quiet as the book that had built it. If this story moved you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to K. Laxor for more stories of courage, grace, and the small human moments that change everything. And tell us in the comments, have you ever misjudged someone by the job they were doing without ever asking who they used to be?